Welcome to episode 27 of Shane Talks 99. It's a really important episode this week because 25 years ago, one of the most important films of 1999 was released. We talk about that one. Another movie that came out on July 9th of 1999 to talk about. And it's one that I'm very sad that I didn't get to rewatch this week. It's a movie called Arlington Road. And it's a movie that I remember really liking and I really enjoyed. And I'm really disappointed that I didn't get to rewatch it this week to see if that's still how I feel about the movie. Um, Oddly, this movie is only available currently on the Stars app. And while for the last couple of days I had been considering just signing up for a month to be able to watch it, I knew that I would sign up and then forget to cancel it, and then I would be paying for it for years because that's just how I am. I just couldn't bring myself to do that. And partially it was because I just kept telling myself, no, I'm sure I can use the same Russian site that I used when I needed to watch Instinct a couple of weeks ago. But oddly, Arlington Road is not available on that website either. So I had a lot of trouble in all the places I have access to watching movies, not being able to find Arlington Road. And it's very disappointing because once upon a time I owned this DVD. Because in 1999, I literally bought every DVD. I would go to Best Buy every Tuesday with Jason, and I'd buy whatever came out. And it was just a collection thing for me at that point. Jason and I have talked before about, having living at home money and just blowing it on movies and music the entire years that we lived at home with our parents. So anyway, I'm really bummed and disappointed that I didn't get to rewatch this movie because I really remember liking it, and it has one of those concepts is it's not something I usually like, which is the bad guy gets away with it ending. But I really remember enjoying the way that it works in this movie. Kind of like Seven level, where I'm okay with the bad guy getting what he wants. Like I just remember it being very good and very creepy and like really well done. Um, so yeah, like I'm disappointed that I didn't get to see if I still feel that way about the movie. Quick synopsis of the movie: it stars Jeff Bridges and Tim Robbins. Tim Robbins' and family moves into the neighborhood, and over the course of some events, Jeff Bridges' character starts suspecting him of being a terrorist. Some things happen. He finds some blueprints in his house. Um, some other things go on. Jeff Bridges starts investigating him and digging into Tim Robbins' past, finds out that he changed his name, finds out that he was involved with a bombing when he was a teenager. Um, Kind of this whole like psychological thriller, mystery, like unfolding type movie. I really remember it being well done. There's some misdirection and kidnapping stuff that goes on in the movie. It leads Jeff Bridges' character to being at the FBI building in the third act. And then there's a moment where one of the FBI goes, "You're the only person here that's not cleared to be in the FBI building." And then, like, he's got his moment where he realizes that he's been set up. And so, like, it's a really smartly written script, if I remember right. And like again, I'm not usually a fan of the bad guy winning. I'm not I don't tend to side with bad guys. It's kind of one of my big things that I have that I hate about Hollywood right now, especially like Disney giving me backstories about bad guys and telling me why a bad guy is a bad guy. Like this movie like portrays him as a good guy, and then you find out he's a bad guy, and then you find out that he's a really bad guy. And so like I really enjoyed that peeling the onion back of this character. I thought it was really well done. And then like I said, the way they set up the ending for the bad guy to get what he wants, I thought was pretty cool. I don't want to completely spoil what happens just in case this is ever available for people to watch again. Like I don't want I mean, it is a 25-year-old movie, and I know I've spoiled other movies on here, but probably since I didn't get to watch it recently, I mean, I know what happens. Like, I know Jeff Bridges' character gets set up to be the bad guy, but like the way they pull it off, I don't want to give that away. Like, I find it very enjoyable, but like, I also really wanted to watch this movie again because there are a lot of connections that I wasn't mentally aware of in 1999. 1999, when I first got my first job at the movie theater, was when I first started learning more about the filmmaking process and learning about like directors and people that wrote stuff like before 1999 I just kind of enjoyed movies. Like I watched a movie and either I liked it or I didn't, and I never really analyzed the why behind that. A lot of stuff was very nostalgic for me. Like I fell in love with The Rocketeer back in '91 when I was 11 years old. And later in life, I learned the reasons why I like Joe Johnston and all the, movies that he's done and the way he creates characters and stuff. So 1999 I was still learning all of this like Hollywood movie connection stuff. This film is directed by Mark Pellington. Now, Mark Pellington in 1997, 2 years before this movie, directed a Ben Affleck movie called Going All the Way. It's the one that's set here in Indianapolis. I talk about it quite often on the main podcast. I bought the book because I love the movie so much, read the book numerous times. Um, I think I like the movie better than the book. They make a few small changes from the book. It's one of those few times I think the movie I enjoy it, but I'm not just gonna say it's better. But anyway, and Going All the Way, directed by Mark Pellington. 3 years after this movie, in 2002, he would go on to direct a movie called The Mothman Prophecies. And I really liked Mothman Prophecies. And like Caitlin and I rewatched it a couple of years ago. I showed it to her because she'd never seen it. And it still holds up. Like it's still a very solid, like creepy, spooky, weird, bizarre, almost like hinting at David Lynch type thriller. Like some very odd stuff happens in the movie that's unexplainable, and I like that about it. So, like, Mark Pellington is a director who I really enjoy. Then this film was written by a guy named Aaron Kruger. And aside from a 1998 TV movie that Aaron Kruger wrote, like, this was his first Hollywood studio in the cinemas movie that he wrote. Um, and I didn't know that at the time, but a year later, he would be the writer to replace Kevin Williamson on Scream 3. Now, granted, Scream 3 is, my personal opinion, the worst of all of the Scream movies. It's still one that I enjoy. I enjoy the going to Hollywood part of it. I don't like the terrible slasher killer or killer not being a slasher part of the movie, but like overall, like it's the worst Scream, but I still enjoy it. But um, in this year, Aaron Kruger will also go on to write Reindeer Games. Or I'm sorry, I don't think it was '99 that Reindeer Games. Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, Reindeer Games was '99 also. Um, I get another Ben Affleck connection to this movie. And then Aaron Kruger also went on to write the Gary East movie a couple of years later called Imposter, which is based on a Philip K. Dick novel. So Aaron Kruger then went on to be a part of like the Ring franchise, which I only liked the first one of those, like the American version. And then he sadly got involved with some of the later Transformers movies that were terrible. So like Aaron Kruger definitely, in my opinion, not an amazing writer, but like knowing that he wrote this movie and he's done some he's been involved with some things that I don't hate. Like I was really going to pay attention to the writing of this movie more now. So like, yeah, it Arlington Road's a movie that I like. I remember liking it. I really wanted to see how it played out for me now because as I've talked, going back and rewatching a bunch of these movies from '99 that I didn't like and finding out that I like them now, like I was very curious to see if something that I remember liking, if I would still like it or not. So hopefully one day I can cross that bridge. Hopefully I can find it to watch or find a DVD of it somewhere or something so that I can see if this movie holds up to how I remember it. Now, the main attraction of July 9th, 1999. I was in the middle of my first summer working at the movie theater. I was surrounded by a bunch of my friends. I was surrounded by people who had become my friend work family, and we got the movie American Pie. This film meant a lot to me then, and it still means a lot to me now. It's something that I will randomly put on just to have playing in the background, like when I'm writing. It's something that when I write like nostalgic shit, I really put it on. It really kind of takes me back to that point. One of the novels that I was working on a couple of years ago that was set in 1999. This was a movie that I would put on just to have my mind go back to then and have those ideas flowing about what was going on because American Pie for my generation is my generation's like sex comedy. Like growing up, when I was, early '90s and like, becoming aware of sexuality and stuff like that, like I would like go to movies like Porky's or Revenge of the Nerds, to get those boob shots in there and like kids trying to have sex and stuff like that. And I mean, like even more than that, while those were like ones that I would go to, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High is probably like the one I went to the most, like just because it was again about teenagers trying to have sex, amongst other things. But like character losing her virginity in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, other, characters talking about having sex in the movie. Like, and it was Cameron Crowe. Like I very much heavily gravitated towards stuff that Cameron Crowe wrote. And then like John Hughes even danced around with it, like not so much overtly addressing it, but I mean, Pretty in Pink has a lot of sexual stuff in it. Weird Science has some sexual stuff in it. Like, but as far as like the '90s went, like this sex specific genre, it kind of died off. Like there wasn't anything that was really like about kids, about teenagers, about people my age, because all those other movies were from 10 to 15 years beforehand. So like I was watching what it was like for guys to talk about trying to get laid in the early '80s, but none of it was really like my generation trying to do it. So the first thing that happened was in 1998, we got the PG-13 version of Can't Hardly Wait. And like, granted, that's a watered down version of what I expect the R-rated version is. And Jason and I have talked about it on the main podcast a couple of times. The R-rated version of Can't Hardly Wait is on like our holy grail of films that we want to see. Because from the trailer and from some of the stuff that you can see in the movie, you can tell that it was supposed to be a lot more like what teenagers were like, and that's why I call it the watered down version. Because like, while Can't Hardly Wait is still an amazing movie and it holds another dear place in my heart for being dedicated to the class of '98, which was the year I graduated from high school. It came out like 4 or 5 days after Jason and I graduated. Like, I still always want to see the R-rated version. I want to see what it was written as. Like, I think there's a story, and I wish I could find the video, but there's a video interview with Chris Moore, who Chris Moore was a producer on American Pie, and he worked with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon a lot. They did the Project Greenlight series together back in the early 2000s. Chris Moore tells a story, and I tried to find this recently to show to somebody, because at the time Chris Moore was married to one of the producers on Can't Hardly Wait. And Chris Moore tells the story about how she brought home the first original rough cut of Can't Hardly Wait when it was still an R-rated movie. And he, at the time, had just signed on to produce American Pie, and they were in the early phases of that. And once he watched the R-rated version of Can't Hardly Wait, Chris Moore said he went into Universal the next day and said, "We have to make American Pie rated R, and we have to up the sex in it," because of what he saw in the R-rated version of Can't Hardly Wait. And again, this is all hearsay at the moment because I know I've seen this interview and I know that I watched it on YouTube. But now when I search for it on YouTube, Chris Moore Can't Hardly Wait interview, I cannot find that video clip that I found. And I hope to one day be able to find it and save it to have the reference for the rest of my life. But that's what pushed American Pie to be what we got American Pie to be. So anyway, so all right, I digress. Let's go back to American Pie and how amazing American Pie is as a film. The characters and the dialogue are just so enjoyable and so relatable that there are so many different people represented in the movie for somebody to find a character that they can relate to. You've got like this core group of friends, like the partier, the nerds, you've got the hotties, you've got the sports people. Like there's literally somebody for everybody in this group that you can go, that was me in high school. That was my best friend in high school. They were dating somebody that was way out of their league in high school. She was a super hottie that was very nice to my group of friends, even though she knew she was hotter than the rest of us. Like, you've got this melting pot of characters that are all trying to navigate the dating scene and trying to have sex. And it just so perfectly represented and encapsulates what the '90s were and what high school was for me. And like, what dating was like back in the '90s, because like I cannot lie, like kids these days and like the online dating, ghosting, swiping, like it's beyond me. I can't understand it. I don't get it. I blah, I digress. I go back to what American Pie was and what dating was like in the '90s and how perfect it was to be awkward around somebody and trying to have conversations with them, and that, first starting to date and trying to see what you have in common and see if you can make each other laugh and see if you like doing the same shit together. Like, all of that stuff, like oh, this girl is way hotter than me. Like, can I really get with her? Like, can I make her laugh enough? Can I talk to her about movies enough? Can I, do whatever to get her to like me? Like, dating in the 90s is just so perfectly captured in this movie. It's flawless. It's another level of comedy. It's both in the script and then like the physical comedy that goes on in this movie, the dancing, trying to jump over a bush and tripping, like Jim, like fucking a pie. Like there are so many acts of physical comedy in this movie that is just really enjoyable and makes it really well done. The dialogue it just hits so close to home. You've got, and granted, like the main group of characters it centers on a group of males, but I feel like there's enough female side characters, kind of like there's not really any girl group scenes. So maybe it is a little more difficult for females to relate to it, but I mean, I feel like there are still very strong female characters written in this to get the female's perspective of what's going on and what was going on in women's minds. And I mean, Michelle's whole band camp conversation about, half of a band camp is sex education. Like, I feel like there are still enough female characters involved to get a female's perspective of it, and it's not just a guy's movie. And like this is one of those movies that like the dialogue was how I talk to my friends, not just my guy friends, but I had a lot of female friends that I would talk about sex with and stuff like that. And I feel like their mindset and dialogue was captured in this. And it's just like 1999 is super important for me because it was also the same year that I saw Clerks and Chasing Amy for the first time. Back in April of 99, Clearwater did what was called the Gen X Film Festival. For 5 weekends, they showed two movies every weekend that were like early 90s stuff. And a lot of them were things that I hadn't seen, like Clerks and Chasing Amy and Mallrats. But I mean, they showed stuff like The Crow and Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. And I mean, like movies that I had seen, but then the movies that I saw in 1999 shaped me in dialogue because of the fact that watching Kevin Smith movies and then watching American Pie and watching some of the other, teen comedies that came out in 99, like they were written in a way that I talked to my friends. The way I talked was like it captured it and it made me just embrace these movies that came out this year or the ones that came out in 94 and 97 because I saw them for the first time in 99 and it was just like that's how I talk to people. That's how my friends and I talk. Like that's just it is what it is. And like I'll be the first to admit, like I can admit that there are things in this movie that did not stand the test of time. You have to remember that like the 90s were a different beast. And I mean the fact this was done at Miramax or not, yeah, I mean Universal, like I don't know, like there are things in this movie that probably I mean, the internet was so brand new in the 90s, and the idea of putting up a webcam in your bedroom and showing a naked girl to the internet, but it was supposed to be just like a small group of people, like, well, if that doesn't make it okay, like, it wasn't something that was addressed and like, yes, obviously it's wrong, in the movie, and they talk about the moral dilemma of doing it or not, but in the end, it's a movie about guys trying to get laid, so they make the wrong decision, but I mean, like, how blurry is that line really nowadays? I mean, I hear stories and read stuff about teenagers that fucking send each other naked photos and sexting and stuff that goes on via the web now. I mean, we didn't have camera phones back then, thank God, because I probably would have done a lot of stuff that I regretted. Um, but yeah, like the internet was in its infancy in 99, so we didn't really know where it was going or what was capable. Now but again, like some of the stuff in Animal House or some of the stuff in Revenge of the Nerds, like things that were done as humor can now be looked at as rape. So it's sex comedies, I feel like always just have to toe a very I mean, they don't even really have to toe the line because at the time when it was made, like it wasn't the same mindset amongst people as it is now. It's the same thing as what's going on with Eminem these days. Like when Eminem first came out and was controversial, it was what it was then. Now he's coming out and he's controversial, but he's controversial where kids are trying to cancel him. as opposed to like back in the 90s, parents didn't like him. Like it's it's just such a weird world that we live in now. And I'll be the first to admit that American Pie might not hold up for the next generation audience, but people who went to the high school in the 90s, or people that saw this movie in theaters or in the 90s or even the early 2000s, like I feel like it gets a pass. I feel like it does some stuff that might be controversial, but it's a really, really good movie. So I don't know. More in line, I went off on a tangent there. That's my bad. Anyway, back to talking about the flick. Just so many different angles to the storytelling aspect of this. Like we've got our protagonist who's just this nerdy every man. He's not even like a nerd. He's just like an average Joe. Like trying to get females' attention, like talking to his buddies about these girls that he's interested in, and like seeing what he can do to like get in with any of them and get their attention. And like we've got a couple that, they're a serious couple when when the movie starts, and like they're just stuck on third base because I mean, it was a big thing in the 90s, telling a girl that you loved her and getting her to sleep with you. And that's kind of where they're at. And like the male has the dilemma of he doesn't want to say it because he doesn't know if he really means it, but she doesn't want to have sex until he says it. And he's thinking like a guy and just wants the sex part of it. So like you got that back and forth of a real relationship. And then you've got, a couple that just start dating in the middle of the movie, and they're trying to get to know each other. They're trying to get to see how things vibe. They're trying to, like she misunderstands him with his friends. Like there's the infancy of a relationship that we get to watch. And like sex isn't really addressed with them until prom night. Like um then you've got the sex crazed party maniac character, which if we want to address Stifler, if you take Stifler and you take Matthew Lillard's Stu Macher from a few years earlier in Scream and you put them together, that was kind of the recipe that Jason and I used to create my character of Tyler McKenzie in our first film, Consternate. Like those party hard characters were kind of what we were going for with my Tyler McKenzie role. So like you've just this eclectic group of friends that all complement each other. You've got the jocks, you've got the normal guys, you've got the smart brainiac character. Like I said, you've got the hot girls, like all just together as a group. And like this film kind of lost a couple of careers with short windows. Like Jason Biggs took off, did this whole franchise, he did an Amy Heckerling movie called Loser. He did a couple of other, teen movies in the early 2000s. Allison Hannigan was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. After this, a couple of years later, would end up being on How I Met Your Mother. So she was just like killing it on television. Chris Klein had a few good years following this, kind of got into some action movies, did a really shitty movie, Rollerball. Um, Mina Suvari and Tara Reid both had, runs of movies. It's been a while since I've seen either of them do anything major, but still, like Sean William Scott, I was just talking about Stifler. Like he got typecast as Stifler for a long period of time. Did all the American Pie movies as Stifler. Did a couple of other characters that were just like Stifler knockoffs or whatever. But like it got him work. He worked in the business. He ended up, I don't remember. He was on some TV show for a while also. Um, and then like we had some older, more mature comedians that kind of, got in there and did it for this. Um, Eugene Levy obviously did, National Lampoon's Vacation and like did a bunch of great comedy in the 80s. And then the Groundlings is plural, or no, possessive. Jennifer Coolidge, I don't know how to say that word properly. Jennifer Coolidge, who worked with the Groundlings in Los Angeles, was another, veteran comedian that just brought a new level to Stifler's mom for that character. So that was pretty awesome, pretty top notch. And like the other thing I want to talk about with this movie, it's kind of been a running thing with all these 1999 teenage movies and even some of the not teenage movies, is the soundtrack. This soundtrack is so good. And like not even just the soundtrack that actually was released, but like just the songs that are in the movie. Um, we talk about it all the time. The 90s, specifically the late 90s, did a great job of taking a bunch of really good songs, putting them all on an album together. And then, like I said, they couldn't even fit everything into an album that was in the American Pie movie. Like on the soundtrack itself, we had Blink 182. And not only were they on the soundtrack, they have cameos in this movie. Like they're part of the, Jim getting, shown on the internet sequence there. It's one of the groups of guys that's watching as it all unfolds. Third Eye Blind has multiple songs on this soundtrack, including So Much Armed Life. Bare Naked Ladies, One Week is in this movie. Um, Sugar Ray, Tonic, Brian Jonestown Massacre, Hole, Everclear, Harvey Danger, Oleander. All of those were like popular as 90s bands that were in this movie. But then like they've got some great throwback songs in this movie. During prom, they play Simple Minds' "Don't You Forget About Me." Gives a great callback to the Breakfast Club and just reminds you about a group of five kids from different backgrounds that are all, friends by the end of the movie. We got Simon and Garfunkel's Mrs. Robinson. That's obviously perfectly used during the scene when Finch and Stifler's mom hook up. And they're like, not only like Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate, not only is that song used at the end of the movie, during the scene between Jason Biggs and Shannon Elizabeth, the one that's broadcast over the internet, there is a shot between her legs and Jim's face that's literally taken from um taken from the movie that I'm drawing a blank, The Graduate. Geez, literally taken from The Graduate, like as an homage. So like it's a lot of great stuff, not just music wise, but like paying tribute to some of these movies that came before it. And then like to top off the music, like we've got Etta James, Nora Jones, Marvin Gaye, like just give give the movie a vibe. It's top notch musical selection in this film, and like this flick introduced me and everyone who has a collection of friends to like stories that I still enjoy to this day. Like anybody that knows me knows I'm nostalgic for 1999. I'm nostalgic for high school. Like, I'm nostalgic for all of that stuff, and like this movie is a perfect example of why. Like it perfectly encapsulates what my life was in high school and in the 90s and everything like that. And like this is a franchise that I think because of how much I fell in love with them in 99, like I've really enjoyed the entire franchise, the four main movies in the franchise. Second movie, like you've got Kevin's character, like the summer after they go away to college and everybody gets back together, and you've got Kevin struggling and dealing with how like things aren't the same that they were a year before. Like the core guys are the same, but and like their friendship, but like he just has trouble dealing with not moving on from his relationship in high school. And then like we get to the fourth movie in the franchise, American Reunion, where they literally get back together, to have a high school reunion, get the whole cast back together. And in that one, it's Stifler that just can't get over the fact that, like, it's been at that point, it was a 13-year reunion, which I found hilarious that they wrote it that way. But um, having Stifler's character be the one that, like, just really always wanted to party with his boys, and, like, how he has trouble dealing with the fact that, like, all of his friends have grown up and moved on and gotten married and had kids, and, like, he didn't. Like he just kept the party mentality and stayed where he was. And I mean, that struck home with me for a very long time. Like, I mean, and now I unfortunately find myself back in that, yeah, I digress. So anyway, but like and then the third film, my least favorite of them, The American Wedding. Like I mean, I'm happy that Jim and Michelle got together, but I just felt like with the third movie they abandoned kind of what worked well with the first two. Granted, it probably had a lot to do with not getting the whole cast back together and having to kind of like write in some new side characters and kind of. I feel like they went really over the top with Stifler's character, and I like they went for some more gross out humor in the third one than I preferred from the other three entries in the franchise. But like, it is what it is. It's fine. But this is a franchise that I hope one day they make a fifth movie. And I don't know if it's going to be American Reunion 2 when they're getting together for their 25th wedding or their high school reunion, which I guess would be this year. So that's probably not going to happen. But anyway, I hope one day to see these characters back together again, get back to their lives, see where they're at, because I feel like I've grown up with them and I really enjoy that. So, American Pie, one of the best films of 1999, the sex comedy of my youth. the one that I related to the most and really still hold on to today. July of 1999 saw multiple Wednesday releases, and we're going to be back with a Wednesday release on the 14th, and I'm really excited about it because it's the Blair Witch Project, and that was an amazing craze to be a part of when it happened. And like Jason and I have told this story about how we got to see it a couple of months early and how that bought into the craze that it was. But those are some stories that I can tell in 5 days when we address the Blair Witch Project and its 25th anniversary. So until then, thanks for listening.